I've been programming now for almost 5 years, and when I look back at some of the resources that I used to get to where I am today, I remember there was always this feeling of the material just kind of cutting corners and, just not being fully comprehensive. I always felt like there was an element missing. One of these, as somebody learning front-end development, was that APIs were typically mocked. They would say, okay, this is where you would make an HTTP request to an API, but for the sake of this tutorial, we're just going to mock some data. Another one is automated testing. The importance of automated testing was always stressed, but within the tutorials, it just seemed like it was a topic that was skipped over. Another shortcoming that I felt I saw quite frequently was tutorials that would teach you concepts and they would be good at it, but they would always have some kind of asterisk next to it saying, this isn't how you would do it in the real world. All of their examples would be within one single file, or they would create all of their examples in CodePen and say, in the real world, you're not going to use CodePen, but this is how you do what you're trying to learn. And to me, it always felt like, even if I was learning the concepts, it left me in a state where I felt unable to build an application from start to finish. So when I was thinking about writing my own book to teach front-end development using the Angular framework, a lot of these shortcomings were things that I kept in mind. So within my book, one thing you'll never have to worry about is saying that data that would typically come from an API or a database is something that we'll skip over, but just know that this is how it's done in the real world. In my book, you set up a database, you set up an API. There's a repository that you clone onto your computer, and you set up the database, you set up the API both locally, and then within a later chapter, you deploy this out to the web as you would in a real job. Once this API is set up, you'll then download and install the documentation for the API, learning how to read an API's expected requests and learning how to see the various responses you can expect to get back from the API rather than everything just being provided for you. In addition to the code you'll write yourself, you'll also learn how to leverage third-party libraries and APIs, including Zomato, a library known as Angular Calendar, and even some features provided to us by Google using their Google Places autocomplete API. You'll do all of this using the Angular CLI. No need to worry about CodePen or plunkers or single files that don't mimic the real world. You're using the CLI provided to us by the Google team that they created with the expectation that this is how you're going to create a real app. In addition to that, we're going to be using the testing tools that are provided to us by the Angular CLI, specifically the tool Karma, which runs the automated unit and integration tests. And on top of that, we're also going to be using this tool known as Cypress, which runs the end-to-end tests of the application. And all of this combined is going to help give you the confidence that you need to learn how to build an application from start to finish. You don't have to worry about a dev environment that doesn't mimic how you're actually going to deploy code. We're going to use the Angular CLI. You don't have to worry about skipping automated testing. We cover that. You don't have to worry about not integrating with a real API using a real database. All of that is covered in this book. Now, it's worth stating what this book does not cover because it is an introductory material. It doesn't cover the basics of HTML, the basics of CSS, or even the basics of programming. But if you feel like you have enough of a grasp on those things and you just are at a state where you say, okay, I understand the basics of JavaScript or TypeScript, I get how HTML and CSS works, I just don't know how to create an application using all of these tools, this book would be for you. Now, I would say that this book is really targeted towards 3 different types of people. The first would be somebody who has a basic understanding of HTML, CSS, and some programming language, let's say JavaScript or TypeScript, and they just don't feel like they know how to wrap those 3 together and create an application. It's the framework's the missing piece. They don't know how to create an application using a modern front-end framework. I would say this is the first person this book addresses. The second would be somebody who already knows Angular but really wants to learn automated testing, whether that be using Karma or end-to-end testing using a tool like Cypress. Since automated testing is such a key part of this book, this would address your needs as well. And finally, I would say that this book is open to anybody who already knows a front-end framework but really just wants to learn another one, in this case, Angular. Within this book, which spans over 500 pages, we'll begin with an overview of web development. You'll learn how web applications today work. You'll learn the division between an API and a front-end app and how those two things fit together. From there, we'll go on to the database setup and the API setup for the backend that's going to power the application that you're going to build. And then we'll get a brief introduction to Angular, where we build a very basic application using the Angular CLI, as well as an introduction to automated testing. After that, you will then move on to building and testing the various features of the application that you'll be using to build the app within this book. So if you're looking to learn how to build Angular applications in a way that doesn't cut corners and leave out various bits of information that are relevant to the experience of a front-end developer, then the Angular tutorial is for you. The book goes on sale this Wednesday, April 25th at angulartutorial.org, where you can buy a digital version of this book, which gives you PDF, HTML, EPUB, and Mobi. There's also going to be a paperback version of this book available on Amazon. So if digital isn't your thing and you'd prefer paperback on Amazon. If you have any questions about the book, feel free to leave a comment below or reach out to me on Twitter.